Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's Space Engineers Plus Me, Episode 7. I'm Enigmius, and today we're starting off with a mistake. It's always fun when the very first thing you do is wrong. We got a connector in our landing pad. A connector is a very specific name for a specific piece of equipment that allows for the automatic transfer of cargo, electricity, oxygen, hydrogen to another connected device with a connector. And I decided that I wanted to replace it with a collector, which is kind of like a space funnel. You see it there. And we're going to be dumping stuff into it from an ejector on the ship, which is basically like a space anus, and it's just going to poop all the ore into the collector. And that's, yeah. If we ever do a retrofit or a second version of this vehicle, it will have connectors instead of what we've got here. I think the rest of the ship does okay, though. We just placed the landing gear, specifically the landing gear that you are given when you select make a new ship. It starts off anchored to the surface that you place it on so that you can build your ship and you don't have to worry about it falling over and all these other things that might be a problem if you just tried to use a regular landing gear. I placed it at the big slope here so that we can get up on top of things, kind of like scaffolding. The whole idea right now is I'm going to build a frame, and it's going to have all of the landing gears attached to it, and then everything else is also going to be attached to this frame. So we're going to build it out of heavy armor cubes, and the whole goal is to make a frame that's fairly tough. It can take a little bit of abuse, a little bit more than if we were using the light armor cubes, without using the heavy armor stuff for the entire ship, making it too heavy to really be practical. So we're going to try and find a balance. Not necessarily saying that this is a fantastic idea. This is the first ship that I've built, and it's certainly the first time that I've used the heavy armor cubes. If we run into problems somewhere and there happens to be a collision of some sort that results in damage, then we can take a look at what we've done and decide whether or not it seemed to have been worthwhile. It's one of those things that we'll kind of sort out over time as we gather anecdotal evidence, seeing how things work out. And this may be a great thing, it may be kind of a waste of time, but you can see here, we're kind of editing out a lot of the duplicate activities so that it's a little bit quicker to see what's going on. This isn't intended as a block-by-block kind of build guide. It's to talk about concepts and ideas that go into making the ship, why we're doing certain things that we're doing, important things to have. Maybe I missed some things and people who are more familiar with it can point it out. It's just about learning without necessarily worrying about exactly where every single piece is going. You can see here, it's just, we're welding. I like the way this is set up because you'll notice we're doing this in red. The LRW Cargo Assist Vehicle. LRW stands for Little Red Wagon because I was thinking of the ship and exactly what its purpose is. And it's basically, the Little Red Wagon concept is very descriptive when it comes to this whole idea. It doesn't have any weapons, it doesn't have any mining gear, it doesn't have really anything except for thrusters, fuel for the thrusters, a radio and ore detector, a cargo container. Here's, look at me putting this is the ejector, by the way, that's going to eject into the collector, and I put it in upside down. I'll fix it, but just for the people who are furiously typing out their comments now that I know I put it in upside down, it'll get better before we have a chance to make it worse. The whole idea of this ship is just so that I can fly a little bit farther without having to worry about fuel like I do with my jetpack now, and I can carry more because as I'm digging around doing whatever I'm doing and I get full up with ore in my personal inventory, I can just run out of our little wherever we happen to be mining manually and dump it in the cargo of the ship and then go back to mining right away instead of having to go all the way back to the central outpost. That's the whole purpose of this ship, is to let me get around farther and let me carry more before I have to go back home. We'll see how it works out. This episode is all about the build. The next episode, we'll do some flying around. We will gather some things, and then we will talk about our next project. So for now, we've got our frame with the heavy armor cubes. We've got the ejector in the middle, the little wee tiny ejector. Now we're placing the cockpit, which is, it's one of those important things that you kind of have to have on a vehicle. And I was glad that I did a little bit of reading in the wiki before I got down to the business of building this ship, because I saw a mention there, someone talking about using an air vent for the cockpit on an atmospheric vehicle, something to do with something in the cockpit, and I didn't realize, as you'll see later, that if you don't have an air vent attached to the cockpit and set up properly, you'll actually suffocate in your cockpit in a world that's covered in oxygen because the cockpit is sealed. It doesn't have access to that outside air, so you basically suffocate when you breathe all the oxygen, only apparently you breathe really fast because it doesn't take long to start dying. We've got some thrusters, very important, and you'll notice I'm using 4 big thrusters all pushing downward to give us lift. We don't need nearly that much when we've got basically an empty ship, but when it's full of cargo, I wanted to make sure that we weren't going to have problems with a lack of thrust, making things more difficult than it really needs to be. So we get them all in place, we weld it all up. As I was saying, the little red wagon, the interesting thing about this is that the blocks that you place have the color information assigned to them before you weld them, so you can place a bunch of different blocks, all of different colors, and then when you go back and weld them all, they just come out as the colors you selected. And I kind of imagine myself doing some surprise builds where they're really, really big, and I just randomly change the colors because it'll be a little treat when I go back to weld it. I won't know what color it's going to be until I'm done welding. I know, you get a little bit loopy after you do a build like this. Batteries, very important. The extra benefit of these batteries is when you build them, they come with a little bit of power inside them already, so I don't have to worry so much about charging them, especially since I got rid of the connector that would have allowed me to charge them directly from the base power. That's kind of, well, the worst part for me is knowing that I took away that opportunity using what I already had set up, and now I'm just pooping into a funnel when we get everything all said and done. Now I need to get some more thrusters. We've got thrusters pushing down. We need thrusters that are going to help us move in other directions. It's very important. I realized, I found out, looking at other ships that I had flown, the Lander, the ships that were made available to me in the Easy Start worlds with the giant base that they already give you, is that if you don't have thrusters pointing in other directions, you can run into some difficulties with navigation because there is no forward direction unless you've got forward thrusters, or you tilt your ship forward so that your downward facing thrusters can push you forward. You can use a combination of both, and I like the idea of the combination of both because the thrusters I'm using for the directional movement aren't big, they don't use a lot of power, but they should help make us a little bit more maneuverable, and I definitely always appreciate being maneuverable, especially when it comes to the difference between a safe landing and a crash because you were rolled just a little bit too far in the wrong direction. So what I'm finding with a build like this where we're placing, 2 to 4 of the same component at a time, is it's just easier to place the framework for all of them and then worry about gathering the materials from storage to weld them all up and get them all done and taken care of. I put a storage container just off the side of the landing pad so that when I'm out here building a ship, I don't have to go all the way inside the base to grab stuff out of storage. I can do whatever I need to do without ever leaving the landing pad. So that's saving me a ton of time. And here you can see we're building off the frame and we're using the light armor blocks now. We just used the heavy ones for the frame itself. The heavy ones are the ones that have that kind of mottled camouflage texture to them. The light ones are just lighter. They don't have the damage absorption capability, but they don't carry the weight either. And then these thrusters that we're placing, these are the side to side. So we've got a total of 4 that we placed, 2 left, 2 right. We've got 2 in the front, 2 pushing backwards, 4 pushing down. The only ones, here, see, look, I told you I'd fix it. The only ones we don't have are thrusters basically pushing up. So the thrusters, yeah, they would be pushing the ship down if you activated them. We don't need that because we've got gravity. If we were in space, we would want thrusters that pushed in that last direction, but here, the whole idea, if you want to go down, is you just let off the throttle and let gravity do whatever it needs to do, and then just control your descent with the directional stuff. We put a conveyor block, that's what we just put there. That's going to allow us to get cargo from the storage block we're going to place momentarily into the ejector so that the ejector can plop it out into the collector. Hopefully we'll get it all set up properly so it doesn't just plop everything out of the cargo container as soon as we put it into the cargo container, because as funny as that might be, it's kind of counterproductive. So at this point, I'm working off a list. I had a little list on like a little post-it pad of things that I wanted to make sure that I included in this build because I didn't want to forget anything that was important. I'm glad I made the list because I would have forgotten a lot of things that are important. But right now, we're just looking at the basics. We have to have a cockpit. We have to have a way to get the cargo out of the ship into something else. We're going to be placing the cargo container that is the whole purpose for the ship, is basically a giant mobile cargo container. And then everything that we place afterwards is just kind of looking at it from the point of view of quality of life, and what can we do to make things a little bit easier for ourselves while we're out and about doing the things. Here's the little wee conveyor on the bottom, and then this giant cargo container. This is the large cargo container for a small ship, I guess would be. You see from the menu, it's a large cargo container, and it's the small ship version. That's going to be what's holding all of the ore that we gather while we're out in the world. And now we're surrounding these 4 frame elements with gyroscopes, which help for more stable and maneuverable flight, coordinating the different thrusters. You don't notice that you've got gyroscopes unless you don't have them and you fly around. And I guess the best way to describe it would be flying in your jetpack versus flying in a ship with gyroscopes. Kind of teach you the difference. I'm placing a ore detector and a radio, and the whole idea of the ore detector and the radio is the ore detector obviously is to give us a little bit of an assist as we're flying around low to the ground to detect the ores. It's only got a range of about 50 meters, which is the same as the range on the drill, which means if we're flying above the ground, it's actually less effective than if we're holding the drill on the ground, because there's a little bit of difference in altitude, right? So we want to be as low to the ground as we can to get the most out of the ore detector on the ship, but at the same time, it's not super important. The radio is so that if we ever have a problem with the ship that results in having to temporarily abandon it, we'll be able to identify where it is in the future quite easily without having to knock ourselves out trying to find it. So this is the connector. I should have had this on the underside of the ship, faced in such a way that it would connect with the connector that I originally had in the landing pad. That's what I should have done, but I was reading about how you have like the small version of things and the large version of things, and they don't connect with one another. Like this small conveyor, you can't connect with a large tube. You can't connect a large tube. You can't connect a large conveyor with a small tube. All these different things have the large version and the small version, and they aren't compatible. So without even trying, I looked at the connectors and found that there's the connector that I just put on the front of the ship, which is the small version. It's the same size actual connector, and it's just small ports so that you can connect things with small tubes on a small ship. In other words, it would have been perfect, but I was expecting it to be a smaller connector that wouldn't work with the one that was in the landing pad. If that makes any sense to you, there was a method to my madness, and the reason why I decided to go with the ejector collector setup, and it was wrong. That was my mistake. Believe it or not, we're just about done here. The only thing that I have left, and I was reading a little bit of something from some people. Fortunately, I don't even know where, so I'm not tempted to point out exactly. Saying not to worry about solar panels on small ships. It's a waste of time because they don't generate enough energy to be worthwhile. And I couldn't help but think to myself that if you're out in the middle of nowhere and suddenly you realize, oh crap, I haven't been paying enough attention to my fuel, I'm low, I don't have enough to get back, but you have enough to land safely, you'd almost be better off just landing with a ship that has solar panels, and eventually it will fill up its own reserves enough so that you can fly it home, as opposed to coming up with something else that's going to give you the fuel to fly out and pick up your ship. I don't know. It just seems like you've got an opportunity for free fuel, and all you have to do is get it to fit on your ship in a way that kind of makes sense. It's a little bit difficult to justify not doing it. I should point out that there's an option in the game. It's on by default. I've turned it off for now, and basically makes it so that if you put something close to the business end of your thrusters, it can be damaged. If you go into the business end of your thrusters, you can be damaged. I'm kind of thinking that maybe that's one of the problems we had with the lander. For those of you who were watching when we started the series, we had our lander and everything was fine, and then by the second episode, one of the two large atmospheric thrusters had basically disappeared. It was gone and left a giant hole in the side of the hull, and I think that's what it was the thrust damage, because there was like an invisible block somewhere in that area. You walk around in that area and it would just stop you, and there'd be no reason. Here's the vent, the necessary air vent. It's kind of surprising that this would be such a big deal, but it's a huge deal. You'll die without it, or you'll have to wear your helmet in your cockpit, and eventually you'll run out of oxygen and you'll be screwed. Anyways, there was an invisible block, and I think the thruster was pushing against that, and the damage to the thruster and then the thruster damage to the hull might have been the thing. So this is what our ship looks like from the inside, from the cockpit. You can see here now we're just getting the air vent set up properly so that everything works the way we want it to. We're gonna grind off the first landing gear, the one that was anchored to the floor, and the two unwelded blocks that are connecting it to the frame, and then the ship will be ready to go. Just like that. So you can take a look at it's not a very nice looking ship. It's a very utilitarian looking ship with a great big fat mouth on the front with that connector, but it's got what we need, I hope. So the next episode, we're going to fly it around. We're going to take a look at how it does in terms of the flying category. We're going to gather up a bunch of ore. We're going to see how it handles when it's as close to full as we can stand to get it. And then that will be our little workhorse to help us gather the materials that we're going to use for our next ship, which will be probably better looking and much larger. So if you want to be notified about those episodes, we're going to be doing lots of builds. This isn't just kind of we're going to build 3 ships and then dominate the universe. We're going to be doing a lot of different things. I'm really looking forward to it. So if you want to know about them, the best way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for that always in the information box below the video. Leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.